All right, so we've got a whole stack of articles and reports here. Looks like someone's been trying to keep up with the latest in international relations.
Indeed, a lot to unpack.
Yeah, trade war shifting alliances, a little bit of nuclear anxiety, just another day at the office, I guess, right?
It seems so.
So where do we even begin? Let's start with Trump's latest trade moves. I guess he just slapped a 25% tariff on all imported steel and aluminum.
All of it?
No exceptions.
Not a single one. It's sending shockwaves across the globe, and it's really putting countries like South Korea in a tough spot.
Well, yeah, I mean, everyone's trying to figure out what his game is here.
Well, it's fascinating, actually. This seemingly blanket policy is a powerful negotiating tactic for Trump. He sees imports as a loss for the U.S. economy, a very mercantilist viewpoint, you see.
Okay, so not exactly in line with what most economists would say.
Right. Many argue that trade deficits aren't inherently bad, but Trump's approach, well, let's just say he's not afraid to use tariffs as leverage to renegotiate deals and try to shrink that deficit.
So he's basically weaponizing tariffs to force countries into playing by his rules.
You could say that, and South Korea, they were actually exempt from those steel tariffs before.
Right, but not anymore.
No, that exemption's gone, and it's a major blow to their economy. They rely so heavily on exports that this puts them in a difficult position.
So what are their options here? I mean, they can't just absorb the cost of those tariffs, can they?
It would be incredibly difficult for them. They need to find creative solutions. And one possibility, well, we've seen Japan take a similar approach when they faced pressure from Trump. They responded with promises of massive investments, pouring money into the U.S. economy, creating jobs here, building factories.
So basically trying to appease the administration by pumping money into the U.S. market.
Exactly. It's a strategy that could work for South Korea, but it's not without its risks.
What do you mean?
Well, copying Japan's playbook might not be so simple for them. Their economic structure's different, and their relationship with China, that adds another layer of complexity to all this.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. We could probably spend a whole deep dive on that alone.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many factors at play.
So it's like they're walking a tightrope trying to protect their own interests while also, not making Trump angrier.
A very delicate balance indeed.
Well, speaking of delicate situations, let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I mean, Trump just announced the start of peace talks, but is it really that simple?
Peace is a very complicated concept in this scenario. There are territorial disputes, conflicting demands, a whole web of alliances and interests pulling everyone in different directions.
And then we've got this bombshell report that North Korea has been secretly supplying troops to Russia. Talk about throwing a wrench in the works.
It certainly adds a new dimension to the conflict with major implications for the U.S. and their relationship with North Korea.
So how does this even factor into the peace talks?
Well, it's possible that Trump sees this as an opportunity, a way to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table on denuclearization.
Wait, you're saying that North Korea sending troops to Ukraine could somehow lead to denuclearization?
It's a bold strategy, that's for sure, but it hinges on whether Trump can leverage the situation to get concessions from Kim Jong-un. North Korea might see this as a way to gain some legitimacy on the world stage, maybe ease some of the economic pressure they're facing.
It's a high-stakes game of chess, and we're all watching the pieces move in real time. So what does this mean for all of us listening? Are we inching toward peace in Ukraine or a denuclearized North Korea? Or are we heading for even more global turmoil?
It's a question worth pondering as we delve deeper into these issues.
All right, so we got a lot to unpack here. And
yeah, it really is a tangled web, isn't it? But these peace talks that Trump's pushing for, they could actually create some unexpected opportunities, especially with North Korea now part of the equation.
Okay, so we've got this complex situation in Ukraine, and now North Korea is involved. So could these peace talks actually be a way to restart negotiations with North Korea? I mean, didn't those summits with Kim Jong-un kind of fizzle out?
They did stall, that's true, but the dynamics have shifted. Now Trump has a clear goal, get those North Korean troops out of Ukraine, and that gives him leverage. He might be more willing to offer concessions on sanctions, now something he wasn't so keen on before.
So the troops become bargaining chips. Interesting. What's in it for North Korea, though? Why would they play along?
Well, it's a chance for them to step onto the world stage and be seen as a major player. Plus, they could potentially get some much-needed sanctions relief, which would be a lifeline for their struggling economy.
So it's like everyone's playing a high-stakes poker game, but the stakes are global stability and economic power.
Precisely. And we can't forget about the ripple effects of these decisions. The economic consequences are going to be felt far beyond the negotiating table.
That's a good point. We've talked a lot about trade wars and tariffs, but what does this all mean for the average person? How does it impact someone listening to this right now?
It impacts all of us. These policies have very real consequences. Take those tariffs on imported goods, for example. They can drive up prices for consumers, which hurts their purchasing power, and trade wars can disrupt supply chains, leading to shortages and job losses.
So it's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about people's lives and the stability of the global economy.
Exactly. And that's the danger with these political calculations. They often prioritize immediate wins over long-term sustainability.
So are we risking long-term stability for short-term political gain?
It's a risk, and it's a question we need to be asking. Is this strategic maneuvering for global power or just short-sighted political maneuvering?
I mean, it makes you wonder what's really driving these decisions.
Right, and that's why it's so important for citizens to be aware of these dynamics. You need to understand how global events impact your life, your community, your future, and you need to hold those in power accountable for the choices they make.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. Before we get lost in the geopolitical weeds here, I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about something a little more personal.
Personal, you say. I'm listening.
Remember we were talking about Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, earlier. We touched on her marriage, but there are more details that emerged that really shed some light on North Korea's elite and their motivations.
Yes. Family ties within such a secretive regime, always fascinating. It often reveals more about the inner workings of power than any official statement ever could.
Exactly. And we know she's been married since at least 2014. But what's really interesting is her husband's position. It suggests this wasn't just a simple love match.
You're right. According to intelligence from defectors, her husband is a high-ranking military official, someone carefully chosen to strengthen the family's grip on power.
So more of a strategic alliance than a love story, yeah? A way to consolidate power within the regime.
Exactly. These marriages rarely happen by chance in North Korea. They're calculated moves to maintain control and ensure loyalty within the ruling class.
Wow, it's like a real-life Game of Thrones, but with nuclear weapons. It's amazing how even these seemingly personal details can give us insights into how power operates in such a closed-off country. It's fascinating how all these threats, trade wars, international conflicts, family dynamics, they're all woven together.
They are. And by understanding these connections, we start to see the world not as a series of isolated events, but as a complex system where everything's connected. Every action has a reaction.
And that brings us to a crucial question. With all these global power plays and shifting alliances, what does this mean for the future of international cooperation? Are we moving towards a world where alliances are everything, or will national interests always come first?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The answer will shape the future of our world.
It's a question we need to keep asking. But for now, let's shift our focus back to the U.S. After all, those trade decisions are having ripple effects that are being felt across the globe. So it seems like Trump's just getting started with his trade offensive, those steel and aluminum tariffs. That was just the tip of the iceberg.
It seems that way, doesn't it? He's setting his sights on bigger targets now. Cars, semiconductors, entire industries are in his crosshairs.
And he's using those tariffs as leverage to reshape these global trade deals to benefit the U.S.
Exactly. He wants to rewrite the rules of global trade.
So what does this mean for South Korea? I mean, they're so dependent on exports to the U.S., and they've already been hit with those steel tariffs. How do they navigate this increasingly hostile trade environment?
They're in a tough spot for sure. One option, as we discussed, is that direct investment in the U.S. like Japan did. It might work in the short term, but it's risky. They could become too reliant on the U.S. market.
It's a difficult decision. They need to protect their own interests, but also, not make things worse with the U.S.
It's a delicate balancing act. The stakes are high. Their decisions will have a ripple effect on their economy, their relationship with the U.S., their standing in the world.
It all circles back to that question we talked about earlier. With all these power plays and shifting alliances, what's the future of international cooperation? Are we heading toward a world of regional blocs and competing interests? Or is there still hope for a more collaborative global order?
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer, well, it's not clear. We're at a crossroads, and the path we choose will determine what kind of world we leave for the next generation.
It's a lot to think about, but it's important to remember that we're not just bystanders. We can make a difference.
Absolutely. We can be informed, engaged citizens. We can hold our leaders accountable. We can demand transparency and responsible decision-making. And maybe most importantly, we can choose to approach these issues with empathy and understanding in our interactions with others, both here at home and around the world.
That's a great point. It always comes back to that human element. The decisions made in those boardrooms and on the global stage, they have a real impact on people's lives, their hopes, their dreams. It's easy to get lost in the abstract ideas of trade wars and geopolitics, but we can't forget the human stories at the heart of it all.
Exactly. Those human stories should guide our actions and inspire us to work towards a more just and equitable world for everyone.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, here's something for everyone listening to consider. How do these seemingly distant events, a trade war on the other side of the world, how do they connect to your life? How do they shape the world you live in? And what role can you play in creating a better future for yourself and for generations to come?
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, embracing the complexity, and choosing to actively participate in shaping our world. That's what this deep dive is all about, empowering you with knowledge, insight, and maybe even a little bit of wonder as we explore these complex issues together.
So keep asking those tough questions, keep exploring, keep learning. Until next time.